If you want to build the smartest artificial intelligence in the world today, you probably don't actually start with a better algorithm.
Right.
And you don't start with thousands of coders in some sleek Silicon Valley office either. You actually start with a glacier, a mountain, and a massive concrete dam.
Which is, I mean, it sounds completely counterintuitive, right?
Yeah, totally.
Because we are so used to thinking of the digital world as something invisible. We talk about the cloud as if our data is just, floating weightlessly in the sky.
Like it's magic.
Exactly. But the physical reality of artificial intelligence is incredibly heavy. I mean, it is deeply grounded in steel, copper, concrete, and just immense, almost unimaginable amounts of raw electrical power.
Well, welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking at a quiet but incredibly consequential global race today. And it isn't the race to build the most human-sounding chatbot
No, not at all.
or the most sophisticated image generator. We are looking at the race to build the physical geographic infrastructure that makes all of those AI models possible in the first place for you to even use.
Because you cannot have the software without the hardware.
Right.
And, more importantly, you cannot run the hardware without the energy.
Which brings us to the core theme we extracted from our sources today. The consensus across the board is clear. AI is the new electricity, and compute, so the raw processing power required to train and operate these massive AI models, is the new oil.
Compute is the new oil. That phrase really changes everything about how we look at the global map.
It really does, because if compute is the new oil, everyone is scrambling to find the best place to drill.
Yeah, and you would think the conversation would immediately center on tech hubs, right?
Yeah.
Like Shenzhen or London or San Francisco.
Okay, the usual suspects. But today, we're looking at a surprisingly specific, entirely fascinating geographic focus. We're talking about Nepal.
Yeah.
We are talking about the high Himalayas.
And that geographical pivot fundamentally challenges our assumptions about the centers of global technological power. I mean, Nepal is stepping into a space that could redefine its entire macroeconomic future.
Let's lay out the groundwork for what we're doing today. We have two powerful, visionary, and honestly directly conflicting pieces of writing to guide us.
Very conflicting.
Yeah, both of our sources operate on one massive shared premise, though. They both agree Nepal possesses a once-in-a-century opportunity to become a global superpower in AI infrastructure.
Right. They agree on the what and the where.
Exactly. But they vehemently disagree on exactly how to build that infrastructure.
It is a massive debate of public versus private strategy, and it's scaled up to a planetary level.
So on one side, we have Samir Maskey, right?
Yes. Maskey argues for a government-led sovereign AI factory. He believes the state must step in, take the initial financial risk, and build foundational infrastructure to protect national interests.
Okay, and on the flip side?
We have Paramendra Bhagat. He issues this fierce rebuttal, completely rejecting the government-led approach.
Completely rejects it.
Oh, absolutely. He advocates for a private, venture-backed strategy he calls Himalayan Compute, which is essentially a Silicon Valley moonshot funded by global capital.
So, our mission for this deep dive is to unpack this clash of visions. We will explore the mechanics of this proposed sovereign AI factory, weigh it against the Himalayan Compute moonshot, and figure out what this means for the future of global technology.
And to be completely transparent with you, the listener, our goal here is to impartially explore these ideas.
Right, we aren't taking sides between Maskey and Bhagat.
No, not at all. We are just guiding you through the mechanics of their arguments.
Exactly. So before we can evaluate whether the government or private investors should build this thing, we kind of have to understand what it is they are actually building.
Yeah, we need to strip away the jargon.
Yeah.
We have to look at the physical mechanics of a modern data center, because Maskey draws a very sharp distinction between traditional data centers and what he calls AI factories.
Okay, so let's break that down. When most of us hear data center, we probably picture a massive, sterile warehouse full of blinking server racks.
Right. Cold aisles, lots of wires.
Yeah, it's where old emails, corporate databases, streaming movies are all stored. It's basically a high-tech filing cabinet.
That's a great way to put it.
Right.
Traditional data centers are essentially passive. They retrieve and store information.
Okay.
But an AI factory is active. It is an industrial engine designed for heavy manufacturing.
Manufacturing, like literally building something. Yes, exactly. Instead of retrieving data, it ingests colossal amounts of data, runs it through billions of mathematical calculations simultaneously, and produces a brand new commodity.
Digital intelligence.
Precisely. To understand why this requires a factory, we have to look at the chips themselves.
Okay, let's get into the hardware. Regular computers run on CPUs, right? Central processing unit.
Right, and a CPU is kind of like a high-speed sports car. It can do one complex task incredibly quickly, finish it, and move right to the next.
Right.
But AI doesn't need to do one complex task quickly. It needs to do millions of simple mathematical operations at the exact same time.
Right, so a sports car isn't going to cut it. Exactly.
Yeah.
That is where GPU's graphics processing units come in.
Okay, so if a CPU is a sports car, what's a GPU?
A GPU is like a massive fleet of delivery trucks.
I see.
Individually, a delivery truck might not be as fast or as complex as a Ferrari, right?
Yeah.
But a fleet of 10,000 trucks can carry millions of packages simultaneously across a city. AI training is essentially matrix multiplication on a scale we've never seen before.
So you need tens of thousands of these delivery trucks, these GPUs, working in parallel to train a modern large language model.
Exactly. Tens of thousands of them all networked together.
And running tens of thousands of high-performance GPUs requires a staggering amount of electricity.
Though staggering is almost an understatement.
We aren't just talking about powering a few servers in a back room. We are talking about drawing the kind of power that could literally light up a medium-sized city.
Yeah.
So if data is the raw iron ore, the GPU is the blast furnace, right?
Yeah.
And the resulting AI model is the forged steel.
I love that analogy.
And what does a blast furnace need most to function? It needs immense heat and energy.
Which is why control over this computational blast furnace is becoming as strategically important as controlling maritime shipping lanes or, global oil reserves.
It really is. The entire future digital economy. Every breakthrough in pharmaceutical research, defense strategy, agricultural yield prediction, it is all entirely dependent on access to this compute infrastructure.
It really is. If you don't control the compute, you are effectively locked out of the next industrial revolution.
You're just stuck.
Yeah, you are stuck waiting for another country to invent the future so you can lease it back from them.
Which brings us to the defining physical constraint of this entire industry, something you can't just innovate your way out of with better code. Thermodynamics?
Yes. Thermodynamics is the ultimate bottleneck.
Right, because when you run thousands of GPUs at maximum capacity, they draw immense amounts of electricity.
Yeah, and they convert almost all of that electricity directly into heat.
Just massive amounts of heat.
Right. And if you don't cool those chips down, they will literally melt themselves. The silicon will just fail.
So the equation for an AI factory has two massive variables you have to solve for. You need an enormous amount of electricity to power the chips, and then you need almost as much electricity to power the cooling systems just to stop the chips from catching fire.
Exactly. And in the data center industry, they measure this efficiency using a metric called PUE.
PUE. What does that stand for?
It stands for power usage effectiveness.
Okay, so how does that math work?
Well, a PUE of 2.0 means that for every single watt of power you use to actually run the servers, you have to spend another entire watt on cooling and overhead.
Wow, so you're paying double for the power.
Exactly. The holy grail is to get that PUE number as close to 1.0 as humanly possible.
Right, because any power spent on cooling is technically wasted power, economically speaking. It's not doing any actual compute.
Precisely. So if you build a massive AI factory in the middle of a hot desert, your cooling costs are going to be astronomical. Your PUE is going to be terrible.
It's like trying to air condition a warehouse full of blast furnaces in the middle of a Texas summer.
That's exactly what it's like.
The physics are just working entirely against you, which perfectly bridges the gap to why Nepal is sitting on a geographic gold mine.
Because Nepal offers an environment where the physics work for you rather than against you.
Yeah.
Maskey outlines this really unique convergence of geographic advantages. First, you have the high altitude and the naturally cool climate of the Himalayas.
Great, it's freezing up there.
Exactly. So when the ambient air outside the facility is freezing, you can use what they call free cooling.
Free cooling? That sounds like a cheat code.
It kind of is.
Yeah.
You simply draw the freezing outside air in, rather than relying solely on these massively energy-intensive mechanical chillers. And that drastically lowers the PUE.
You aren't fighting the environment at all. You are weaponizing the environment to run the factory more efficiently.
Exactly. But the cooling is really only half the battle. The real advantage Nepal brings to the table is the power itself.
Right, the mountains.
Yeah, the Himalayas are home to incredibly steep elevation drops and massive, massive glacial rivers.
It is the perfect topography for hydroelectric power.
Perfect. And unlike solar or wind power, which are intermittent meaning, they only generate power when the sun shines or the wind blows. Hydropower provides what is called base load power.
Base load, so that means it never stops.
Right. It is consistent, continuous, and highly reliable. For an AI factory that needs to run its GPUs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week without a single hiccup, baseload renewable energy is just the absolute holy grail.
Let's do the math on this because Maskey provides some cost comparisons in his text that are frankly staggering.
They really are.
If you want to build this AI factory in the United States right now, your electricity costs are going to hover between 10 and 30 cents per kilowatt hour, mostly depending on the state and the local grid.
And if you look at Europe, the situation is even tighter.
Why is that?
Because of recent energy crises and the push for rapid decarbonization, European rates can easily range from 15 to 40 cents per kilowatt hour for massive industrial users.
Okay, so 30 cents in the US, up to 40 cents in Europe. Now, contrast that with Nepal.
Yeah, this is where it gets crazy.
Because of the vast, mostly untapped potential of this continuous hydropower we just talked about, Maskey calculates that Nepal can support compute infrastructure at just 5 to 8 cents per kilowatt hour.
That 5 to 8 cents, that is a massive economic arbitrage opportunity.
That is huge.
When electricity is your single largest operating expense, I mean, it often accounts for up to 40% of the total lifetime cost of a data center. The difference between 30 cents and 5 cents isn't just some slight competitive edge.
No, it completely changes the game.
It is the difference between an unviable project and a highly, highly lucrative one.
Let's put that into perspective for you listening. If you have a 100-megawatt facility running constantly, right, that's roughly 876 million kilowatt hours a year.
Okay.
At 30 cents in the U.S., your power bill is around $260 million annually, just for power.
Wow.
At 5 cents in Nepal, that exact same power bill drops to $43 million.
That's incredible.
You are saving over $200 million a year purely based on geography. It completely upends the global tech industry's financial models.
It does. And it also requires a major paradigm shift for Nepal itself.
Oh, sir.
Well, historically, when Nepal generates surplus hydroelectricity, the strategy has always been to export that raw electricity across the border into India via physical transmission lines.
Right. Which is exactly like a country mining raw iron ore, loading it onto a train and selling it for pennies, only to turn around and buy back the expensive steel beams from the country they just sold the ore to.
That's a perfect analogy. It is a completely extractive economic model. But Maskey proposes something revolutionary here. Local processing.
Local processing, so keeping the power inside the borders.
Yes. Instead of sending the electricity across a physical grid, which involves transmission losses and massive infrastructure costs to build the lines, you use that 5-cent electricity right there in Nepal.
You plug it straight into the GPUs.
Exactly. You run the complex AI models for global clients domestically.
So you are literally packaging the electricity into compute power. You turn a physical resource like water flowing down a mountain into a digital commodity.
Right.
And then instead of exporting it over physical power lines, you export that digital intelligence globally over fiber optic cables.
And the physics of data transmission allow for this so perfectly. Light traveling through a fiber optic cable from Kathmandu to London or Tokyo takes only milliseconds.
Right. Speed isn't an issue.
Exactly. For training large AI models, where the work is done over weeks or even months and then the final model is exported, latency is barely an issue at all.
Makes sense.
And the value of that packaged digital intelligence is exponentially higher per unit of energy than the raw electricity itself could ever be.
Imagine the macroeconomic implications here. We are looking at a country that, as Bhagat points out in his text, has traditionally relied heavily on foreign aid, tourism, and remittances.
Right, money sent back by citizens who've had to leave the country to find labor opportunities abroad.
Yeah, exactly. We are talking about taking an economy built on those incremental traditional sectors and attempting to leapfrog straight into the foundation of the 21st century intelligence revolution.
It is the very definition of a transformational opportunity.
It really is.
So the fundamental question isn't whether Nepal has the ingredients. Both of our sources agree they absolutely do. The question is how to mix those ingredients.
Right, who builds the kitchen?
Exactly. Which brings us to Maskey's specific proposal. Blueprint A, the vision of the sovereign AI factory.
Okay, so Maskey is adamant that the government must be the prime mover here.
Very eminent.
He argues for a national, state-backed compute center, and he anchors this entirely on the concept of sovereignty.
Yeah, technological sovereignty is becoming a really critical issue for nations globally right now.
It is. Break down how Maskey sees it.
Well, Maskey observes that right now, if a hospital in Nepal wants to run an AI diagnostic tool, or the government wants to optimize its tax infrastructure, or even a local bank wanting to run fraud detection models, they are almost entirely dependent on foreign infrastructure. They are renting server space in Virginia or Singapore, and they're using models built by American or Chinese corporations.
Which works fine when everything is peaceful and cooperative globally.
Sorry?
But relying on foreign clouds for your core national infrastructure feels incredibly fragile.
It creates deep vulnerabilities. If a foreign government decides to change its export controls on technology.
Or if a submarine cable gets damaged.
Exactly. Or if a foreign corporation simply decides to change its terms of service, your entire domestic digital economy could literally be held hostage overnight.
That's terrifying for government.
And furthermore, there are massive privacy concerns. When a nation's sensitive health data, financial records, and defense logistics are sitting on servers in another jurisdiction, who actually controls that data?
You are essentially storing your nation's gold reserves in another country's bank vault and just trusting them to never change the locks.
This is exactly what it is.
Maskey argues that building a sovereign AI stack is no longer a luxury. It's a national security imperative.
A sovereign stack means having the physical hardware on your own soil, running local models, trained on local data, and secured by national guardrails.
That security argument is incredibly compelling. But Maskey pairs it with an equally strong economic argument, right?
Yeah, he does. Because access to high-performance compute is incredibly expensive globally right now.
Extremely.
For a young software engineer or a startup in Nepal, getting access to a cluster of advanced GPUs to train a new model is financially prohibitive. They just can't afford the hourly cloud rates.
It creates a massive bottleneck for innovation. You could have the most brilliant engineers in the world, but if they don't have access to the heavy machinery, they can't build anything.
Exactly. So Maskey envisions this government-backed compute center as a catalyst.
Okay.
By subsidizing or providing low-cost compute access to what he estimates could be 10,000 local AI entrepreneurs, researchers, and university students, you democratize access to the tools of the future.
You stop the brain drain.
Exactly. Instead of your top talent migrating to Silicon Valley just to get access to the hardware, you provide the hardware locally.
Maskey actually runs the numbers on what it takes to build this foundational facility, which I found fascinating.
Let's hear the math.
He suggests starting with a 10-megawatt compute center. That translates to roughly 2,000 to 4,000 high-end GPUs.
Okay, a solid starting point.
Right. And he estimates the total capital expenditure required to build this. So that includes the physical building, the specialized liquid cooling systems, the transformers, the fiber networking, and of course the chips themselves, would sit between $110 million and $200 million.
Now, $200 million is a significant capital outlay for a developing nation.
It's a huge bet.
But Maskey points to the revenue potential. Even at a 10-megawatt scale, he estimates the facility could generate between $35 million and $80 million annually in compute revenue just by leasing out processing power.
And that is just phase one. The vision extrapolates that outward. Once the proof of concept is established, you scale up to a 100-megawatt facility holding 20,000 to 40,000 GPUs.
That's massive.
At that scale, the annual compute revenue could balloon into the hundreds of millions of dollars. The facility essentially pays for itself and then becomes a massive revenue generator for the state.
The underlying philosophy here is really vital to understand. Maskey believes the initial risk, the scale, and the complexity of building the very first AI factory in a new region is simply too large for the local private sector to absorb.
They just don't have the cash.
Right. It is a classic public works project.
Think about the Eisenhower interstate highway system in the United States, or even the early days of the ARPANET, which became the internet.
Yeah, perfect examples.
The government didn't build the highways because they wanted to turn a profit on toll booths.
No.
They built the highways because connecting cities allowed the private sector to build entire new industries. Trucking, motels, suburban real estate.
That is exactly the framework Maskey is using. The state takes on the heavy, risky, unglamorous lift of pouring the concrete and laying the foundational infrastructure.
Right.
They do it to catalyze an ecosystem. Maskey believes that once the government proves the model works, it will de-risk the entire region.
Because the hardest part is already done.
Exactly. And that naturally attracts foreign direct investment and private capital for future expansions. The state basically acts as the visionary architect.
It's a very clean, structured nation-building argument. The government uses its resources to build the digital roads of the 21st century.
It sounds great on paper.
But as compelling as Maskey's math is, Paramendra Bhagat looks at that exact same proposal and sees a catastrophic red flag.
Oh, he really does. And it's important to note, Bhagat agrees entirely with the foundational premise.
Right, he's not arguing against Nepal doing this.
No, not at all. He agrees compute is the new oil. He agrees Nepal's hydropower offers a once-in-a-century geographic arbitrage opportunity. But when he looks at Maskey's proposed solution, a government-run, state-funded compute center, he issues a blistering rejection.
Bhagat's argument essentially boils down to this. Governments are good at building physical roads, but they are historically terrible at building globally dominant technology platforms.
He roots this critique in the historical reality of how the technology sector actually operates. Look at the companies that define the modern compute landscape.
NVIDIA, Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure, OpenAI.
Exactly. None of those were born out of a government ministry's 5-year plan.
Not a single one.
They were built by private entrepreneurs operating in fiercely competitive, fast-moving markets.
Why does that matter so much to Bhagat? Because the speed of technology moves faster than the speed of bureaucracy.
Always.
Bhagat paints a really vivid picture of what happens when a government tries to run a tech startup.
He points to the mechanics of state procurement.
Procurement, the killer of dreams.
Right. If a government-run AI factory needs to upgrade its cooling systems or purchase the next generation of GPUs, they can't just authorize a purchase order overnight like a startup can.
They have to go through parliamentary committees.
They have to issue public tenders, conduct environmental reviews, and satisfy multiple layers of oversight.
Which are designed to prevent corruption, sure, but ultimately paralyze speed.
Exactly. Imagine trying to compete with Sam Altman or Jensen Huang, who are making billion-dollar pivot decisions over a single weekend.
While your National Compute Center is waiting 6 months for the Ministry of Finance to approve a budget variance for some server racks.
It's absurd when you think about it.
Yeah.
Bhagat warns the facility would become politically captured, heavy on administrative bloat, and permanently dependent on public financing just to stay afloat.
He describes the danger of a licensing office mentality taking over what needs to be an agile, hyper-innovative operation.
The fear is that a sovereign AI factory wouldn't become a catalyst at all.
What would it become?
It would become a stagnant monument to inefficiency, quickly outpaced by the global market.
There is a massive tension here between our two sources. Maskey is saying the initial cost of entry is $200 million. No local startup has that capital, so the government literally has to step in to solve the market failure.
Right.
But Bhagat is saying if the government steps in, the bureaucracy will suffocate the project and it will fail anyway.
It's quite the paradox.
So who is actually right about how massive infrastructure gets built?
Honestly, both fears are deeply validated by economic history.
How so?
Well, the fear of undercapitalization, that vital projects never happen because private markets deem them too risky initially, is a very real market failure. We see it all the time.
Right.
But the fear of bureaucratic stagnation, that state-run enterprises become inefficient sinks of public wealth, is equally real.
So if Bhagat completely rejects the idea of the government writing the $200 million check, but acknowledges that local startups don't have the money either, where does the capital come from?
You still have to buy the concrete and the GPUs.
Exactly. This leads to Bhagat's alternative roadmap, Himalayan compute, which he frames as a literal Silicon Valley moonshot.
Bhagat argues that Maskey's idea of a single sovereign AI factory thinks far too small. A national center is a bureaucratic mindset.
What does Bhagat want instead?
Bhagat wants to leverage Nepal's geography to serve global AI demand. He envisions a sprawling ecosystem of data centers stretching all across the country's hydropower corridors.
It's planetary scale ambition. He doesn't want to just supply local university students. He wants to supply the computing power for the next generation of global AI models.
And to do that, you need capital at a scale a national government simply cannot provide.
Let alone risk.
Right. So he outlines a funding roadmap that perfectly mirrors the venture capital lifecycle of a Silicon Valley unicorn.
You don't ask for $200 million on day one.
Exactly. You raise a $1 million seed round to prove the thesis.
Okay.
You use that to secure $10 million for a pilot facility. You scale that to 100 million Series B, then a 1 billion growth round, then 10 billion.
And where does it end?
Eventually, he sees this ecosystem attracting over $100 billion in global investment.
$100 billion. That is an astronomical figure for an economy the size of Nepal's.
It is staggering.
Where on earth does a startup go to find tens of billions of dollars for infrastructure?
This is where Bhagat's geopolitical insight is so fascinating. He points away from traditional Western venture capital.
So not Sand Hill Road.
No. He points directly toward the Gulf sovereign wealth funds, the sovereign wealth funds of Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar.
They're sitting on trillions of dollars.
Trillions. And those funds are facing an existential deadline. They know the era of fossil fuels is peaking.
They have to pivot.
They are aggressively trying to transition their economies away from traditional oil and diversify their portfolios.
They are pouring hundreds of billions of dollars into artificial intelligence, cloud computing, and the global energy transition. They want to be the leaders in the post-oil economy.
But the Gulf region has an acute geographic problem when it comes to AI infrastructure.
Let me guess. Thermodynamics again.
Exactly. The Middle East is incredibly hot, and they face severe freshwater scarcity.
Right. Running and cooling massive AI factories in the desert requires immense amounts of energy and water.
Which completely destroys their PUE metrics. They have all the capital in the world, but their geography works entirely against them for compute.
So they have a gap.
Yes. And Nepal, on the other hand, lacks the capital, but has the perfect geography. Freezing temperatures, endless glacial water, and cheap green hydropower.
It is a perfect geopolitical match. The Gulf has the money and needs green compute. Nepal has the green compute and needs money.
It really is elegant. But, and this is the absolute crux of Bhagat's argument, the managers of these trillion-dollar Gulf funds do not deploy capital because a foreign government ministry wrote a polite white paper.
Right, they aren't charity organizations.
State-to-state infrastructure deals are slow and fraught with political friction.
So who do they give the money to?
They deploy capital to visionary, aggressive founders who present a proven, scalable, highly profitable business model. They back entrepreneurs who can execute at incredible speed.
Bhagat says Nepal has to undergo a severe psychological shift here. The nation has to stop acting like a state-owned utility waiting for foreign aid grants and start acting like a startup chasing venture-scale returns.
It requires empowering founders, recruiting global engineering talent, and obsessing over exponential growth rather than incremental, slow development.
Bhagat actually makes this incredibly personal in his text, which I wasn't expecting.
Oh, he really calls him out.
He throws down a direct challenge to Maskey, the author of our first source, because Maskey isn't just an academic writing policy papers.
No, he's the founder of a technology company called Fuse Machines.
Right. And Fuse Machines achieve something very rare by successfully reaching the public markets via NASDAQ.
And Bhagat uses this fact brilliantly. He argues that Nepal doesn't have many founders with a proven track record of navigating global capital markets.
But Maskey is one of them.
Exactly. So rather than asking the Nepali government to risk public funds, Bhagat challenges Maskey to use his own company's capital.
He tells Maskey, write the first $1 million check yourself.
Put your money where your mouth is.
Exactly. Not as an act of charity, not out of national pride, but as a deeply asymmetrical, highly lucrative venture investment.
Bhagat draws an analogy to one of the most famous venture investments in history.
The Yahoo one.
Yes, Yahoo's early investment in Alibaba. When Yahoo invested $1 billion into a young, unproven Alibaba in 2005, it was viewed as highly speculative.
Very risky.
But as Alibaba grew to dominate the Chinese e-commerce market, that investment returned tens of billions of dollars. It basically became the financial lifeblood of Yahoo for years.
Bhagat is looking at the Himalayan compute potential and saying, this is your Alibaba.
Right.
A $1 million seed investment today to secure the prime hydropower locations and build the first pilot facility could easily be worth $1 billion within a decade as global compute demand skyrockets.
He is demanding a venture-scale risk appetite.
It perfectly illustrates the dichotomy between the two thinkers. Maskey looks at the massive scale of the challenge and says, only the state has the broad shoulders to initiate this.
And Bhagat looks at the exact same challenge and says, only a private founder with actual skin in the game has the speed and vision to execute this.
So we have a total standoff. Blueprint A gives us public infrastructure, state-funded, prioritizing sovereignty and local access.
Right.
Blueprint B gives us private venture capital, globally funded, prioritizing planetary scale and speed. But here's the reality for you listening. You can't build a 100-megawatt industrial facility on a mountaintop without interacting with the government.
It's physically impossible. You need land, you need permits.
So can these two visions actually be synthesized?
I think they can. If we accept Bhagat's premise that the government will fail if it tries to actually operate the AI factory, we have to redefine the state's role.
Okay, so if their job isn't to buy the GPUs and manage the cooling systems, what is their job? Because they are absolutely essential to the equation.
Bhagat actually provides a very clear framework for this. He argues the government needs to act less like a traditional developing nation ministry and more like the governments of Singapore or Dubai during their massive growth phases.
The government must become the ultimate facilitator.
Yes. The comparative advantage of a government is not managing technology. It is managing the jurisdiction. Their power lies in their ability to dictate the rules of the physical space.
Right.
Bhagat lists a highly specific set of duties the state must perform to make Himalayan compute possible.
Instead of pouring the concrete, the government needs to clear the obstacles out of the way of whoever is pouring the concrete.
Precisely. They need to coordinate land acquisition, which, can take years in heavily bureaucratic systems.
It's a nightmare.
They need to guarantee high-capacity access to the power grid without endless, agonizing negotiations.
What about the internet?
They must ensure international fiber optic connectivity is legally protected and untaxed to death.
Makes sense.
And they need to provide absolute legal and regulatory clarity regarding foreign direct investment. Those Gulf wealth funds need to feel their billions are totally safe from expropriation or sudden tax shifts.
Bhagat uses the term one-desk policy. He argues this entire initiative needs to be placed directly under the Prime Minister's office.
Which is brilliant.
Imagine you are an entrepreneur trying to build a $500 million facility. In a normal bureaucracy, you have to get environmental permits from one ministry, power clearance from the energy department, foreign investment approval from the central bank, and land rights from local municipalities.
It's a total nightmare that just kills momentum.
A one-desk policy means the entrepreneur interfaces with exactly one empowered government office.
And that office's sole mandate is to rapidly coordinate all the other ministries behind the scenes and clear the runway. The state's role is the systematic removal of friction.
If we synthesize both of our sources, a unified vision really emerges. Maskey is absolutely correct that the state has a vital foundational role to play in this once-in-a-century transition.
Yeah, because a free market alone cannot resolve complex land rights and international fiber regulations.
Right. But Bhagat's warning holds true. If the state tries to fly the plane, it will crash.
The government's job is to build the runway, install the air traffic control, ensure the airspace is clear, and then let the private sector pilot the aircraft.
It requires a profound evolution in how a nation governs itself. They have to transition from a mindset of controlling scarce resources to a mindset of accelerating abundance.
Take a step back and think about the sheer magnitude of the ambition we have unpacked today. It's wild. We're looking at a country known globally for Mount Everest, for trekking, for spiritual retreats.
Yeah.
And the conversation happening at the highest levels right now is about how to execute a triple-digit economic growth strategy to become the foundational pillar of the 21st century global AI economy.
It is a phenomenal case study in how the digital revolution is colliding with physical geography.
It really is.
Let's pull all the threads together for you. We started with the realization that AI is not a weightless software phenomenon. It is heavy industry.
Right. It requires massive amounts of energy, making compute the new oil.
And Nepal, by pure geographic luck, possesses a combination of freezing temperatures and incredibly cheap, abundant, renewable hydropower.
Which creates that unparalleled economic arbitrage opportunity we discussed, where power costs 5 cents instead of 30 cents.
We then explored the two distinct paths to seizing this advantage. Maskey's vision of a sovereign AI factory argues that the state must build this foundational infrastructure to protect national data security and ensure local startups aren't priced out of the AI revolution.
He views compute as a vital public utility.
And we weighed that against Bhagat's private Himalayan compute model. Bhagat warns that state-run tech projects drown in bureaucracy.
He advocates for a venture capital mindset, courting billions from Gulf sovereign wealth funds who desperately need green energy and relying on the state solely to remove regulatory friction.
Now, why does this debate matter to anyone living outside of Nepal?
Because the current trajectory of artificial intelligence is running headfirst into an energy wall.
Yeah.
As AI models grow exponentially larger, their power consumption is becoming a massive global climate concern. The solution to the AI energy crisis might not just be writing more efficient code.
What is it then?
It might require physically moving the compute to where the green energy naturally exists.
Yeah.
The future of digital intelligence is going to be dictated by the physical constraints of geography.
Which brings us to a final thought to leave you with. We started by shattering the illusion of the invisible cloud and looking at the heavy reality of blast furnaces and dams.
Yeah.
We've talked about how AI processing is going to inevitably migrate to the regions where physical energy is the cheapest and the greenest.
Right.
But consider what happens next. Throughout modern history, geopolitical power has been concentrated in nations that controlled maritime trade routes or possessed massive military-industrial complexes or sat on top of massive oil reserves.
That's always been the case.
If the most valuable commodity in the 21st century is digital intelligence, and that intelligence can only be manufactured in places with immense natural cooling and renewable energy like the high Himalayas or near geothermal vents in Iceland or massive wind corridors, how violently will global power dynamics shift?
It's a huge question.
If compute truly is the new oil, are we about to witness the rise of completely new global superpowers whose dominance is based not on military might or historical banking centers, but purely on the geographic luck of possessing cheap, freezing, green electricity?
It's entirely possible.
Think about the physical reality behind the screen the next time you ask an AI to write an email for you. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.